Good evening. Welcome to episode 13 of Sword of the Spirit. Here we go again. This is a tough nut to keep this thing up all the time. Anyway, technical difficulties all the time. But no matter. Okay, as I promised you in the end of the last episode, we talked about the harvest judgment, what was going on in the heavenly realms, the 144,000, and the announcements of the marks in the arms, the hands, the forehead, etc., the two marks, the two beasts, and everything. So we're going to proceed on into chapter 15, and it says in chapter 15, verse 1, there was another sign in heaven that was great and marvelous, that the seven angels that had the seven plagues filled up with the wrath of God, and a sea of glass mingled with fire, and he's giving a description of what it looks to him as like the heavenly throne area, standing on the sea of glass, and having the harps of God. Those are those who were raptured. They sing the song of Moses. Great and marvelous are thy works, O God Almighty, and just and true are thy ways, thou King of saints. Who shall not fear thee? Who shall not glorify thy name? For thou only art holy, for all nations shall come and worship before thee, for thy judgments are made manifest. And then I looked and beheld the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony was open. The beasts were girded with their golden girdles, and one of the four beasts gave the seven angels 7 golden vials full of the wrath of God, who live forever and ever. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and his power. No man was able to enter the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. Now, we went through all of Revelation 16 last week. We talked about the coronal mass ejection and the devastating havoc and death and destruction that it causes on the earth, including what seems to be this great hole that was in the earth. That hole could be caused by the Apophis, which was the Death Star, the Destroyer, Abaddon, Apollyon. These things are all right here in scriptures. And the Apophis was seen in a prophetic vision many years ago. I forget the man's name. We'll have to look that up. But I saw the video. I listened to him. And then I looked at the science from the astrophysics point of view. And yes, there is indeed. Apophis is a huge, couple of miles long asteroid that comes close to Earth. More than likely innocuously in its normal orbital path in its travels in the universe. However, something as violent as a huge explosion, ejection of energy, gas, heat, fire from the sun itself. Now, by the way, it takes maybe 2 to 3 days, about 30 million miles, 31 million miles a day. That's how fast it's traveling. About 3 days to hit the earth once it's released. And we read all about that. We spoke about it. We talked about what it was. The one thing we didn't do is go on into the 7th vial, which begins in chapter 16, verse 17. A voice came out of the temple saying, "It is done." Voices and thundering, lightning, great earthquake, such that men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great that the great city was divided in 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of wine of fierceness of his wrath. Every island fled, and the mountains were not found. And then there fell a great hail. And we spoke about that. So that's our lead-in for the beginning of tonight's discussion, which is chapter 17, the great harlot. Now, I think a few weeks ago we talked about that and prepping you on what is a harlot. A harlot is not a common euphemism for prostitute or anything like that. Harlot simply means a counterfeit bride. So that means there's another bride. And remember that the counterfeit always appears and comes first and tries to preempt God and to fool and deceive the people of God. Okay? We know that the bride of the Messiah is the church, both the 144,000 and all of those from the nations wearing the white robes, such as the numbers with tens and tens of thousands we read of. And that comprises the bride, the true bride that the Lord lifts out of here. But the other bride is not a bride at all, but a harlot, a counterfeit one. So one of the seven angels that had one of the vials talked with John and said, "Come hither, I'm going to show you the judgment of the great whore that sits upon many waters." So yes, it's both in this case. With whom, now listen to this closely, the kings of the earth, that is the leaders of governments, nations, they don't have to be kings, they could be princes, they could be sheikhs, they could be the president, they could be the premier, whatever. It all's the same. Those whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, drunk with the wine of her fornication. And so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw this woman on a scarlet-covered beast full of the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, decked with gold and precious stones, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornications. And it said on her forehead, "Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth." And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and of the martyrs of the Messiah, and I wondered with great admiration. So what is this? This harlot is the false religion. It is the false religion. And it's the religion that dominates the Middle East. It hails out of Babylon. Babylon is a catch-all phrase for that great empire, that vast empire in Babylon, which ultimately, Babylon in those days was comprised of what we know today as Iraq and Iran. Okay? And Babylon is in Iraq, the city. But the mystery Babylon he talks about, the mother of harlots, is this religious system. Okay? It's a religious system. That religious system has tried to replace both the Jewish faith and Christianity and everything in its path. There's some very, very critically important information that we have to get through here, and it's going to be more than a little bit disturbing because it's not what we commonly think of or imagine. Let's go on. The angel says to me, "I'm going to tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, that has 7 heads and 10 horns. 7 heads are 7 nations. The horns are leaders from these nations. It is a beast that says from the beginning, the beast that was, is not, and yet is. Here's the mind that has wisdom." And this is important because it's going to prove what I've been telling you. This counterfeit bride, this counterfeit church, this counterfeit religious system has 7 heads And those 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And there's 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he'll go for a short space. And the beast that was and is not and is it and even is the 8th and is from the 7th. Okay? And the 10 horns are 10 kings that have gotten power, but not a kingdom yet. They receive power for a short time, an hour, with the beast. They have one mind. That mind is to destroy Israel. And their strength is given unto the beast. They're going to make war. Their allies are going to make war with the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome. The faithful who are called. The waters that thou saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. We talked about that. And the 10 horns that you saw on the beast, they'll hate the whore, and they'll make her desolate and naked. You see that the war is actually going to go on right within our own system. All right? And the woman that sits saw is that the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. All right? Now, let's talk about the 7 mountains. Now, in popular Christian end-time teaching, and it goes back quite a way, where everybody says, well, during the time of the Messiah, the Roman Empire was there. And that Roman Empire, Rome sits on 7 hills. So guess what? The Catholic Church and Rome, the revised Roman Empire, must be the harlot of Babylon, the beast of Revelation, and all that stuff. It's a nice, tidy little package, all right? Except it's wrong. The Catholic Church got enough of problems, all right? We all know them. They're publicized from the top to the bottom. It's an apostate religious system, but there's a lot of good people, a lot of strong believers in the Messiah that are there, that are part of that system. But you see, even though, and I can read to you directly, all right, from the Council of Laodicea, where Christianity became basically the religion of the Roman Empire. All right? And it became Holy Roman Empire. I recall John Paul Sartre, an existentialist, wrote that anti-Semitism created the present-day Jew, and history proves that without a doubt that the first Christians were in fact Jews. We know that. They're first century. Jesus himself is a Jew. And the split came when Christianity had its roots in Israel and Judaism, but adopted another law, and it wasn't God's. They took on the role of a persecutor. So I want to quote you from the Synod of the Council of Laodicea from the year AD 343 through 381. And Canon 29 of that Synod, all right, that papal Synod states clearly, and I quote, Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath, but must work on that day, rather honoring the Lord's day, and if they can, resting in then as Christians. But if they shall be found to be Judaizers, let them be anathema from the Messiah. And this is only one of scores of many anti-Semitic and anti-law edicts from the great councils of the days of the early church, the Roman church. But their effects remain in today. Now, how sad that so many have bought into this lie, all right? Even Messianic believers. That's why today, all right, Jewish today is in conscious opposition to Christianity. Why? Because they've thrown out everything, all right, except one thing. One thing that continues to tie the Catholics to ancient Judaism that wasn't thrown out. And remember, the Catholics changed the Bible. They have their own Bible, Dewey Bible. They changed the order of 10 Commandments, and they changed all of this stuff such that it has an anti-Semitic flavor, if you will. Okay? So, at the end of the day, what really happens here is that the Catholics observe one thing that ties them directly to Abraham, and that's circumcision. They celebrate on January 6th or 8th, 8 days after the birth of the Messiah. They celebrate the day of circumcision, which is distinctly Jewish. All right. Of course, we see that here everywhere in the country, but not necessarily in the whole world. And with different medical practices, religious practices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I believe that link keeps them in the vine, in the wild olive branches, so to speak. And it's clear that link still remains and will be accounted as good for them. I'll tell you, boy, Revelation brings transformation if you really grab onto it. So while the Catholic Church has all its problems, and everybody has blamed it and called it, and erroneously said, well, because she sits on 7 hills. But you got to remember, there's something much more deeper. And I'm going to show you something that's going to really take you aback, okay? Because remember now, it says that not only does this 7 hills, but it's really doesn't say hills. All right, Revelation 17:9 says 7 mountains. Different name, different thing. And Rome, and it says that she's surrounded by many waters. Okay. So, 7 mountains, many waters. Now, guess what? There are 17 cities in the world that are surrounded or associated with 7 hills or 7 mountains. The 3 that we are most concerned with as far as this Bible and Revelation and Middle East is concerned are 3 cities: Rome, Jerusalem, and listen up, Mecca. Really? Oh, yeah. Now, of those 3 cities, 2 of them sit on hills. Guess which 2? Rome and Jerusalem. Mecca is the only one that sits amidst 7 mountains. Now, let's talk about the waters. Rome, Jerusalem are not surrounded by many waters. However, Mecca has 6 major bodies of water directly accessible to it. You say, well, that's nice, and that seems to be pretty cool. Well, I'm going to take it another step. All right, we're going to go a little deeper. And this one is what I hope you're sitting down for this. Each of the hills and the mountains surrounding those 3 cities have names. And, well, you know what I do with names. I translate them. And they create a story. So, I'm going to read to you the names of the mountains or the hills that surround. So we'll start with Rome because that seems to be the most popular. There are 7: Aventine or Aventinus, Salian or Salius, Capitoline or Capitolinus, Esquiline, Palatine or Palantinus, Quirinal, and Viminal. Those are the hills that surround Rome. In Jerusalem, we have Scopus, Olivet, Ophel, Zion, Second Zion, Corruption, and Antonia. Now for the mountains of Mecca: Seba, Safa, Marwa, Milha, Ma'aya, Hulaya, Guslan. I want to read to you. The interpretations of those names. In Revelation 17, it speaks of a city And in English, it calls them hills, as I said. However, the word for hills in Hebrew is oros, mountains, not buros, hills, as we saw, as I read to you. I want to get to the names. As you know, all these cities, the 3 cities have names, and everything has names, and they all have meanings. And we know what they mean, but it creates a compelling story and a hard example of the definitive proof that only the finger of God could possibly have written this and underscored it, co-signed it, wrote it with a constant message of the word at the beginning, from the beginning of the breath of the Creator, our God. All right? Now, I'm going to give you the individual names, what they mean. So Aventine for Rome means the arrival. Salian means angels of the sky and the celestial sky. Capitoline is the temple of Jupiter, and Esquiline is a cult. Palatine, royal privilege. Quirinal, powerful man of peace. And Viminal, one who bends to the goddess. Interesting. Now we go to Jerusalem. Scopus means the lookout or the watcher. Olivet is the olive mount. Ophel is a swelling mound. Zion is a parched place, a new place. The Mishkat, or the corruption, is the other one. It means immorality and depraved. And Antonia means priceless and praiseworthy and beautiful. So now, I'm going to read to you the combined meaning of all these names based on exactly what I told you these are translated to. Listen. Starting with Jerusalem. The watcher sees from the Mount of Olives. The swelling hill stands out above in the parched place, surrounded yet by immorality and depravity, but it is priceless, praiseworthy, and beautiful. Goodbye, dream of ascending to the exalted covenant of the circumcision and Isaac's sacrifice, for she knows God is the cause. The arrival in the sky of the celestial angels of the temple of the cult of Jupiter, with royal privilege to the powerful man of peace who bends to the goddess. The watcher sees from the Mount of Olives, and the mount swells and stands out above in that parched place, surrounded by immorality and depravity, but is priceless, praiseworthy, and beautiful. So we just read the meaning of those 3 cities, each of their 7 mountains. Now, I'm going to read them in the reverse order. It doesn't change. This is what they mean in reverse order, going from Rome to Mecca and then finally to Jerusalem. Okay? We went the other direction before. So now listen again. The arrival in the sky of the celestial angels to the temple of the cult of Jupiter, with the royal privilege to the powerful man of peace who bends to the goddess. Goodbye, dream of ascending to the exalted covenant of the circumcision and Isaac's sacrifice. For she knows, who? The harlot. She knows, the mistress that we spoke of. Jezebel, the spirit of Antichrist. She knows God is the cause, and the watcher sees from the Mount of Olives the swelling that stands above in the parched place, surrounded by immorality and depravity, but she is priceless, praiseworthy, and beautiful. That's Jerusalem. That's the prize. Have you ever heard anything quite so amazing in all your days? You can all do this work. You can all look it up. I've shown you how to do this. I'll continue to show you, and I'll continue to open this up. Now, I said the harlot of Babylon, and I also said that the spirit of Antichrist was there. Now I got to tell you something that's really rough. Please note it, write it down, look it up. In Judaism, medieval Judaism, there is a concept of, like Christianity has an Antichrist, okay? Judaism has an anti-Messiah. And the anti-Messiah's name is Armilus, Armilus. But nobody knows what it is. You look up that name in Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, and Arabic, all of which have names including more than one meaning to many, similar names. But this one has no meaning. And I will tell you, without a second's hesitation, that when I prayed about this, that still small voice said to me, the name is an anagram. And I may have mentioned this to you prior, but now it's critical that you understand this. When you break down the anagram known as Armilus, okay, that same small voice said to me, what are you looking for? I said, well, I'm looking for the Antichrist, spirit of Antichrist. He says, okay, then what is the word spirit in Arabic? And I said, Ru. Either R-U-H or simply R-U. He said, take the R-U out of Armilus, and what are you left with? You're left with 5 letters. Those letters are I-S-L-A-M. So the harlot, the false religion, isn't the Roman Catholic Church. It's an apostate religion. The false bride, the harlot of Babylon, the spirit of Antichrist, the spirit of Jezebel, a spirit that looks to control, usurp control from a higher authority, admitting that it is higher but not submitting, placing fear into that authority such that it becomes isolated, and then as Jezebel works to destroy people, nations, and the intent is the world. The funny part about Jezebel, and we're going to get a lot more into that in the second half of this, all right, as we go further, is that Jezebel plays both sides of the fence, almost like the central banks that debt finance for hundreds of years. They debt finance both sides of the war. The enemies, they fund one guy and they fund the other guy, and a bunch of X's and O's cross paths all electronically, and they get rich. By the second, they get richer. That's how they do it, all right? But the Jezebel spirit is the same way. It is using and manipulating both sides of this beast, the beast out of the sea and the beast out of the earth. The governmental system, control, isolation, stay home, don't go out, don't have holidays with your family, as well as the religious beast that's going to converge down on the Middle East, Shia against Sunni, against Jews, against believers. This is the configuration that's setting up. You saw what the names mean in the city. It's consistent with the entire evolution of everything that we're talking about here. So we got a big problem. We got a big problem as this thing begins to come into focus much more. Armilus, the spirit of anti-Messiah. It's anti-Semitic. If you're anti-Messiah, you're anti-Semitic by definition. If you're against what Yeshua, Jesus the Messiah, did, you are anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic by definition. And thus you are anti-Messiah or anti-Christ. That's the long and short of it. I'm not mincing words. So much for tonight. For part 1. We're going to come back and we're going to dig in a little bit more. We're going to talk a little bit more about Jezebel so you get a much more firm understanding of what exactly happened historically with her and what's going on in the world right now today. All right, we're going to take a little break. We'll be back in a minute or two,